Delighted to say that joining us is one of the most fervent defenders of the Prime Minister, the Conservative MP for Lichfield, Michael Fabricant, joins us down the line. Welcome to the programme, Michael. Are you listening to what Peter Edwards was saying there? From the Labour Party's perspective, the reason why this vote took place this week is just there's that overwhelming expectation that there'll be more fines down the road. Is that something that washes with you?
Well, I mean, I agree with Peter that the optics are not good. I'm not so sure that he's admitted to a criminal offence, because actually getting a fixed penalty notice, and I know that in the great scheme of things, people won't be concerned with this, but actually getting a fixed penalty notice doesn't mean that you've committed an offence. What it does mean is that you do not choose to challenge something in court. I mean, the point of law is slightly obscure, but it's actually very, very clear on this. I think the problem is going to be is if he gets a load more fines. There's two different issues, isn't there? First of all, did he deliberately mislead Parliament? I'll come back to that in a second. And what sort of offences, if they were offences, did he actually commit? I think people do have, and I think Peter did, have some sympathy with the fine that he's just got, the Partygate thing, where he was in a meeting to do with COVID, then some people walked in with a cake. People he'd been working with closely anyway because it was his birthday. But the point, whether he misled Parliament, and it's very, very important that it's got to be emphasised that this is, did he deliberately mislead Parliament, is an interesting one, because any Prime Minister would have got advice from his civil servants. Now, those civil servants, some of those civil servants, attended parties, or whatever you want to call them, gatherings in number 10 Downing Street too. So it looks to me as if he was given advice that he was actually acting lawfully as long as it was at the place of work, as long as he didn't invite outsiders, and as long as he didn't go and visit people outside, because it was all about not spreading the disease. And don't forget that Boris Johnson's own mother died during lockdown.
I believe Boris Johnson's mother might have died a little bit after lockdown. Was it not in September or October of 2021? I'm going off the top of my head on that, so perhaps we should move on to the. But certainly no one is accusing the Prime Minister of seeing her during a lockdown, yes, which I think is the
or indeed nobody's accused him yet, and indeed nobody's accused him yet of going out to events, going out to parties. It all seems to centre about what was happening in the workplace. And I think that the key point that the Committee of Privileges must get down to is determining what advice did he get from the senior civil servants. Because if he was told you're not breaking any rules for whatever reasons, because you're at the workplace, it's a bubble, whatever the reason, then it's perfectly reasonable to say that he didn't set out to deliberately mislead Parliament, because he kept saying, I've been given advice that I was not breaking the rules.
And this is the tricky point, isn't it? So much of this comes down to what someone's interpretation of that phrase that is within all of those coronavirus rules, what is reasonably necessary for work purposes. And it seems to me, indeed, I spoke to a barrister on this programme yesterday who was saying that's quite a broad set of definitions. You know, is a cigarette break reasonably necessary for work purposes? Would some of those other key workers who celebrated birthdays during the pandemic, was that reasonably necessary or not? Is a moment of levity in a work day covered or not covered by the regulations? It seems like that's a contested area. And so as long as this can be contested and remains challengeable at the very least, is it your view, Michael Fabricant, that actually, after all of the fuss, all of the rigmarole of what happened in Parliament yesterday, the Prime Minister may well actually be cleared by the Privileges Committee? The Privileges Committee may well find that Boris Johnson did not knowingly mislead the House.
That's correct. I think it all depends as well. As I said, first of all, what advice did he get from the civil service? If I were on that Privileges Committee, that is precisely the question that I would ask. I would say, who gave you that advice? And then I would call that civil servant in to corroborate or not whether or not that advice was in fact given to the Prime Minister. But also, it has to be said, it also depends now on what happens after the elections, not in relation to whether the Conservatives do well or not. It's generally understood, because we did particularly well 4 years ago, that we're going to lose 800 seats. But because the Metropolitan Police have said they won't be issuing any more fines, always assuming that they're going to issue more fines, until after the local elections. Now, if Boris Johnson is given fines for other things, then we've got to look at each one of those in its own merits, because if it was obviously a party, then I think that's not such a good look at all, and not such a good position for Boris Johnson to be in. If, as you say, it was somebody or some people just having a break from hard work, then that's a different matter. But you know, the thing that irritates me personally and many other supporters of Boris is that on the big issues, he gets things right. He's not a details man. Nobody selected him because they thought he had a head for details. What they did select him for was that he gets the big picture. You know, we've now got Ukrainian soldiers here in the United Kingdom being trained on new vehicles that we're supplying the Ukraine. No other country in NATO is doing that. We got it right, as you well know, on vaccines. We got it right by getting out of the European Union and delivering Brexit. On the big calls, he does seem to get it right. And I sometimes despair. I think only in Britain could a Prime Minister fall over something like Partygate, if that is what happens.
Well, Michael Fabricant, we really appreciate your perspective on the briefing this afternoon. I'm afraid we're going to have to go to a break now, but thank you so much for joining us and talking us through that.